Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Wayne Baker. I'm one of the staff therapists with Affair Recovery, and we're going to do the last part of our series called Why Do Couples Fail to Thrive After an Affair? So many of you know that I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and as most therapists will attest, we deal with a lot of grief on many different levels, on many different fronts. And generally speaking, I believe that unresolved grief is the source of much of the depression that we see in our offices. And just like depression, I think the pain that comes after the discovery of an affair can be bone crushing. It's like losing a loved one, and sometimes it's even worse. It's a pain like no other thing that we experience in our lives. I want to be really careful to compare infidelity with the loss of a loved one because they both bring their own set of pain and grief. But there are some similarities. And just like with the death of a loved one, we at least experience some kind of finality. And people send us cards and flowers and bring us food. And if you look at even the old Jewish tradition, when they lose a loved one, they mourn this thing for a year. And there's different phases of it. And when you step back and look at it, it's really kind of a beautiful process. It's a way of honoring themselves and the one that they lost. Unfortunately, with infidelity, we don't do anything like that. We have to live with the ongoing consequences and the corresponding fear of repeated betrayal. And it perpetuates the trauma, sometimes for years. And the truth is, we live in a culture that says, hurry up and get over it. Think about it. If you've worked in corporate America, even when we lose a loved one, most corporations will give us 3, sometimes 5 days for bereavement. And that's it. Anything else, you've got to take sick leave or family medical leave or something like that. Then it's time to get back to work. We live in this culture that says, hurry up and get over it. You don't get to count your loss. You don't have time to mourn. And it's so unhealthy. And because of that, what I really believe is that we have lost the freedom and the ability, the know-how to really embrace our grief. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how to grieve our losses. And I really do think that that might be one of our soul's tasks while we're on this planet, is to learn how to consider and grieve the losses that we experience through this life, both the big ones and the small ones. I really do believe in our culture that we have a problem with the type of loss associated with infidelity, because most of you already know it's not just one loss. There's a big one, and there's these little ones that go along the way as you work through this thing. We're expected to be able to overcome any obstacle by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We're taught from an early age that this can-do attitude gives us the ability to overcome all of life's obstacles. That has been ingrained in most of us since we were really little. So what do? We enter into these tasks, or these modes, as Rick likes to call it, in order to deal with our pain and begin to move on. And we want to do it quickly. I see this every day with every couple I ever work with. They just want to get past it. And I get that. Nobody wants to suffer needlessly. But here are 3 things that I see most common in my office when couples are working through infidelity. The first one I want to talk about is fix it. It's this fix it mode. And I hear this every single day when somebody comes into my office. Wayne, I've just got to fix this. Wayne, will you help us fix this? We're broken. We got to fix it. And even the unfaithful will want to fix it. And frequently they get frustrated and give up because they're tired. Their tried and true methods from the past in other areas of their life don't work. They end up giving up. And they throw their hands up and they're like, I can't do this anymore. And if there really is a fix to this, we've talked about this so many times, and I'll continue to talk about it as long as I'm breathing and doing this work. The first 2 components of fixing it, if there is a fix, is get the whole truth out as soon as possible. Don't drag it out. and then lots and lots and lots of empathy. That's the most important thing. That's really the fix, is empathy over time. Empathy and compassion. And don't confuse those with sympathy and pity. And I hope to talk about more of those in a future newsletter. But the number one thing is fix it. And these aren't in any certain order. It's just the ones that I see, that John and Rick and Leslie and I talk about all the time, that we see in our offices. So the second one is they try to control, or you try to control it. And as you go through this, what we find is that it's impossible to control our spouse, whether you're the unfaithful or the betrayed or both. What we learn is that when I try to control my spouse, there's going to be rebellion over time, or there's going to be resentment, which is going to lead to more and more distance, emotional distance. And even controlling the flow of information causes more damage in the long run than getting everything out in the up front. Trying to control any way is a recipe for disaster, and it's because it's stopping the grieving process. It's a way we protect ourselves. Another way that we try to control our grief is by trying to understand what happened. And that is important, but there's this false belief that our ability to comprehend what happened will stop the pain. And especially in the case of infidelity, there's rarely enough answers. And even when answers do come, they fail to lessen the pain. These quick answers that we're all looking for, there's nothing enduring about them. It's really important that you understand. I'm not saying don't try to understand. Do seek some knowledge and some understanding about what happened and what's underlying there, especially if those things can lead to greater expressions of empathy, like learning the full story of what happened and learning how to heal. But just this cognitive, this cerebral way of looking at it and understanding will not heal you, and it will prolong the grieving process. And you've heard me say in the past that when we fail to grieve, when we fail to feel those feelings and those emotions, they just go down to the basement and they lift weights and they get stronger. And then they're going to come back as anger and resentment and contempt and bitterness. So please do your grief work. I think I've said before too, one of my favorite books on grief is the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's simple. It's a process of learning how to walk through all the steps of feeling those losses. And generally speaking, I think we as Americans have little training in the healthy practice of grieving. It's applicable to every situation that are too messy to fix and too big to control and too unjust to understand. You know, Rick says that grief is the only way to deal with the loss and pain of infidelity, and I totally agree with him. The couples that I have seen do really well after this, that is one of the big components, is they both embrace their grief fully. Grieving is our soul's primary path to transformation and transforming pain and the trauma and ultimately into peace and acceptance. For many of us, though, grieving is a foreign path. Think about for a minute when you were a little kid. How many of us heard, "You better stop that crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about," or we were sent to our rooms, or we were given more chores to do instead of being able to feel sad about something, even if we got in trouble and we were sad? How many of us experience that? I could say probably 90% of my caseload has. And I'm not trying to throw parents under the bus. I think parents were doing the best they could with what they knew at the time when we were little kids. And I think that just kind of sets us up to not feel our feelings. So we've learned to run away from them. And we've learned how to even fight to avoid feeling the losses and the grief, rather than allowing the pain to be transformative. We attempt to manage it or even numb it. And the problem is we can't selectively numb only one certain area of our life. So we end up becoming completely numb, And all-consuming numbness results in more collateral damage along the way. And as one of my favorite people on the planet, Richard Rohr, says that pain that is not transformed will ultimately be transmitted. I couldn't agree more with Richard Rohr. To move beyond betrayal is imperative. It's a way we learn to grieve and allow the time and the space to do just that. As I say all this, what I'd really love you to do is to hear your own resistance to what I'm saying. It shows up every day, these little resistant parts. For those of you that know internal family systems, know that is my primary way of working. So it helps us to say, this is not all of me, but what parts of me are resistant to my grief, to experiencing it, to feeling it, to embracing it fully. It shows up in questions like, how can anything good come from this? I didn't cause this. Why should I have to walk through this? This is their issue. Why do I have to do this work? So you hear that, and I'm not saying it's always resistance to grief, but quite frequently it could be. And here's the truth. I don't always know the answers to these questions, but I think they're good questions for you to be asking of yourself, because the answer is going to be different for every person. But I do know that there are some situations that are so big in our life, and infidelity recovery is one of those things, that it's impossible to find all the answers. And at times, frequently I think, that we have to go on living without knowing everything. You know this, you're right in the middle of it, and you go to bed at night and you wake up and it's right there again, and we have to get up and we have to get ready for work or get our kids ready for school and make lunches, and you just have to keep moving. And that doesn't mean that you're forgetting or you're moving past it. You're doing all of this at the same time. It's all part of the process. There are no good, quick, easy answers, at least ones that are going to endure over time, especially when it comes to what we're going to do with the pain that feels like such a death to our soul. How do you handle running into something so horrible that it brings you to the end of yourself? It brings you down to your knees. I think as you consider those questions, that it's really important to remember that in this situation that you're in right now, and others like it, you may feel powerless, but you are not helpless. Please, please remember that. Because we all still get to choose how we respond to ourselves and to our spouse. Everybody has a choice. And that's so important that I just want to remind you, on the website, if you look at the We Believe statement on Affair Recovery's website, two things that stand out: that severe crisis can lead to radical transformation, and failure teaches us what success cannot. And I can honestly say that the year following my infidelity 25 years ago was truly one of, not the only, but one of the most painful and difficult times of my life. But it's also the time where I grew the most. And as many of you know, I'm no longer married, but even my ex-spouse, if she were in here today and we're still great friends, she would say that it was the same for her, that we both had to dig deep and embrace our grief on a bunch of different fronts. But it was also the time that led the most growth and transformation in our life, that really changed the trajectory of our lives. And by that, please hear me, I'm not trying to justify my or anyone else's devastating actions through infidelity. But for me, every major lesson that I've learned in adulthood hasn't been the result of success, but it's been the result of a mistake or some hardships that came my way. If we allow ourselves the grace to process it fully, there's a way for our pain to be used as a catalyst for our healing, our growth, and transformation. And then later, ultimately, to become a beacon of light for other travelers along this journey. One of the things that we have seen over the years is that a major determining factor between those who go forward with a new life and those who get stuck for years is their willingness to grieve the loss. The loss is. For those of you who choose to go into this grief, you may spend months, maybe years, even sorting through all the tears and the pain and the true deep sorrow. But at the end of the journey, most that do this feel refreshed and renewed. I've probably talked about this mentor couple that comes to the EMS weekend a couple times because their story just so blessed me and encouraged me. The woman, the one that had been betrayed, explained how each night after she got her kids to bed, she'd go into the bathroom, make a big bubble bath for herself, and she would just cry and feel every single feeling and cry out to God and pray and just feel everything. And I don't know how long she did that, but she did it for quite a while. And while I know that may sound strange to some of you, at the end of her season of mourning, she was renewed. And I wish you could all hear her story. She worked through her grief and was able to emerge without any tangible sadness. And the weight in her soul was gone. I've never known a single person, including myself, who has thoroughly grieved and then gone on to have any regrets or felt the need to blame someone else. They're free and at peace. When people fail to move forward after an affair, it's often due to the inability to grieve the loss. Instead of healing from the pain, they try to control it or manage the pain, which only results in further damage and isolation. And isolation is a big thing when they try to do that. Think for a minute of some people that you know, now don't say their names out loud, that have failed to grieve any loss that they've experienced in their lives. And just notice, untransformed pain manifests itself in some unexpected, harmful ways. Frequently, it's seen as bitterness, resentment, anger, contempt, and eventually this untransformed pain makes us toxic to ourselves and to everyone else around us. Untransformed pain is also transmitted through our anger. This not so subtle approach is about overtly transmitting the pain back onto those who have wounded us. I hear it every day. I just want him or I just want her to hurt as badly as I do. So you do things to create that in their lives. Vengeance drives our anger as we become consumed with making the other person hurt as badly as we hurt. But it turns out our anger has an appetite of its own. It's impossible to get all of it out. Rather than removing the pain, anger begets anger. It just creates more and more and more. And it only serves to amplify the pain as the appetite for the anger grows. Please, please, please do not skip the grieving process. It's hard and it hurts, but it's truly grieving the loss created by infidelity is the only way to overcome the pain and ultimately discover peace. And for some people that might be 18 months. For other people that might be 5 years. I've seen everything in between there. There's no timetable, but you honor yourself and do the grief work that you need to do for you. And really, your spouse is going to be, their grief is going to be very different than yours. If you are the betrayed spouse, would you please consider taking the online Harboring Hope course? Registration is going to open again soon. I think you'll find it a great support and a beautiful gift that you can give yourself as you learn to and allow yourself to grieve fully. Thank you so much for joining me this week. We wish you all the best as you journey through this process and learn how to embrace your grief. Know that we are here to support you any way we can. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.